Hello and welcome to yet another video on how to be a great GM. Why is he wearing a dressing gown, you might ask, and a particularly old one? Well, to answer your question, Seth Kewen wrote in many moons ago and asked me to discuss some of my favourite moments from role-playing games that I have played in or run over the past 20 odd years. And I was doing the maths, and it's actually 23 years that I have been running around running games. And it has been quite a remarkable journey. And anyone who has ever played with me in any one of my games rooms before will recognize my dressing gown as being a staple form of attire for me to run. And my dressing gown was made for me by my aunt many years ago when I was but 14 years of age. So, Seth, here are some of my top RPG moments from my, so far, limited career as a player and as a game master. And the very first one I have to kick off with is the very first game that I can remember playing, which was Advanced Dungeons & Dragons in the red box. Now, some of our older viewers will be nodding sagely, going, yes, I remember Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. I remember the red box with the red dragon on the cover with the man holding up the sword, trying to fight it off. And that basically was my introduction, where I think I played the elf because they could cast spells, and I thought that was kind of cool. And the carrion crawler that you meet right outside the dungeon if you look down the well that's been boarded over ate all of us, and I was hooked. From there, I progressed into a friend's game. Now, this is when I was in grade 7 or standard 5, as we used to call it back in the day. So I was about 12 or 13 years old. And my very first serious game was run for me by a great game master at the time, a gentleman by the name of Mark. And it was the four of us playing this very difficult second edition game. And my character's name was Bellenran, and I can remember the name because I still have the character sheet, though sadly it's been stuck away somewhere on a shelf somewhere. But one of the things I used to do when I was a player was to do sketches of the characters and that kind of thing. So I kept all of those, and of course the character sheet is part of that. And Bellenran managed to get to level 4 before the campaign collapsed, but it was the old system where you still had to acquire experience points through various means and all the different classes, different types of experience point values, and it was complicated with THAC0. And what stuck out for me for that game, though, was that it was really hard. I mean, I remember using my level 1 spells to go and entertain people at pubs and things, to gather a few coppers together so we could buy some rope to go adventuring with. And that campaign ran on for quite some time. Another thing that was interesting was that the GM made us write up a calendar. And we had to chalk off every single day that we spent out on adventure. It was a 10-day week with 9 months in a year. And he would literally make us keep track of food, carrying capacity, all those kind of things. And it was a really technically challenging game, especially for a bunch of 13-year-olds who'd never really been exploring outside in the real world anyway. But it firmly entrenched my desires to continue playing. Now, he was one of those GMs that had files filled with NPCs and maps and encounters and all manner of preparation. And he would get frustrated by certain players who would help clear out a goblin infestation. It was a kobold infestation, actually, if I remember correctly. Infestation in the sewers, and then take over their lair and use it as their point of base of operations, really. And we spent many a session trying to work out how to convert a table into a door, and it frustrated him quite a bit. And I remember him flushing our sewer lair out with some torrential rain. And what that did for me was it really made us feel as if we'd been cheated by a GM who just didn't want us to stick around in that particular city anymore. And I think that that is the important thing, is no GM should ever GM without playing at least regularly, maybe not regularly, but at least once or twice a year, because it allows you to remember what it's like to be on the other side of the great dice. And that's important. But I digress. This is reminiscing of my time, not things that I should do or explain. Another very important game for me was when I finally came out of the proverbial closet. I formed a whole new role-playing group, and I was insistent that they were happy with my particular orientation at the time. And I'm happy to say that that was when I was in my early 20s, and I still roleplay with several of them to this day. And we had some fantastic times running around with clerics trying to help change the course of history, and rangers who were just trying to kill everything. That particular group was instrumental, really, in cementing my position as a GM, because I had just started studying at the time at university, or Technicon as we used to call them, and script writing was part of it. So being able to tell stories to these guys and work with them in a very free and open environment, which was not something that I'd experienced before, I could really hone my art. And I don't think I played very much after that. I became a firm GM, being able to tell the story and guide the story rather than sort of be dragged along by it or try and find it as you bumble your way through things. So that was a very influential game in my life. And I think if we look at role-playing, it does give us that space to say, hey, I'm a giant green orc. Does anyone have any problems with that? And I hope that it is a community that allows people to be who they are, because we're very special people. We are storytelling, creative, imaginative people. And if you don't believe me, head on over to our other channel where we've done interviews with the role players who play in my other game, Bacon, and you will see that it takes a special type of crazy to play the games that we play. Anyway, so that was for me, a very poignant game, and I'll remember that cleric and his female companion, played by a very, very large man who made me look small, with a big beard, and yet he would love to play blonde-haired, big-breasted women running around doing all sorts of things to men. I wonder if I was anyone at that table. Anyway, another game that sticks out in my mind is a campaign that was set in a quasi-oriental setting where for 4 sessions we didn't roll a single dice. It was a 2-player game, so we could get away with it. And what we were doing was, I was obviously GMing, and the 2 guys were a representative of a political faction, a house or a clan that was trying to maneuver its way within the empire structure, and they came across a plot to assassinate the emperor. But it was a plot upon plot upon plot, and it was a completely political game. There was no need for combat because they had armies and bodyguards and assistants that they could call upon to save them. What they needed was to figure out which clan was paying for the assassins and how to pay their own assassins and what information to use and who to manipulate into having a ceremonial tea with so that they could get more information out of, and what gift to bring the emperor to allow them to attend the secret dinner. So it was a very, very, very politically heavy game, with the players having to commit to paper, very complex family lines. And again, what struck out for me in that campaign was the fact that the dice weren't needed. We very seldom needed to make diplomacy rolls or manipulation rolls or deception checks or whatever the roles were, because the characters and the players were basically the same people. And what the players knew or didn't know is what they could portray. And it just felt like we didn't need them. Ironically, 5th session, they decide they're going to lead the charge of their army. They've discovered that the one clan has got an army on the other side of the imperial city, and they decide to lead their army over the hill in battle, and they both died horribly at the end of Swords of Peasants because their combat skills had been completely forgotten about and weren't necessary. It did, however, have a certain poetic justice to it. But I remember that game as being particularly unique. Now, I am only talking about my fantasy games here. I have done a whole lot of Star Trek and Star Wars games, which I can share with you in the future if you find this video interesting. Another game that sticks out for me was when I first created Braxland. Now, Braxland is a map which I still have. It's on that wall over there. But it wasn't a very good map because it was inspired by the maps of other novel writers, well, of novel writers, I'm not a novelist, of novel writers and map makers, because that was one of the things that I did in high school, was every book that had a map in it got taken straight through to the library and photocopied, so I could take the map home and look at it and see what they did and try and work out why they put a city here and not there, and whether I agreed with the layout of the map or not. And so Braxland, my first incarnation of what you see behind me, which is now known as Braxia, which I think is a better name all round. But Braxland I was on leave from work because I had pneumonia at the time, and I was buggered if I was going to stay in bed. So I grabbed A4 sheets and just started drawing, and I ended up drawing this massive map. Eventually scanned it in, I've still got those scans somewhere, scanned it in, printed it out, and made it as pretty and as nice as I could, and Braxland was born. Now, it had nothing, there was no information apart from the continents, and if you want to know what I'm talking about, there's a tutorial on map making that I have done. You can go and check that out to see how my maps evolve over time. So Braxland was born, and the very first campaign that we ran, I was living at the time with two friends of mine, and one of them was another GM whom I respected quite a lot because he was very good at it. He was an English teacher, so it kind of made sense, and his partner was with him at the time, and he was a very good player as well. And we would role play, and our group got bigger and bigger and bigger, and one of the guys from that particular group role plays with me in my system reviews to this very day, 15 years later, which is quite nice. I like the fact that these friendships last and they've forged around the table. Anyway, so we decided with this big group we're going to have two GMs. So I would GM the story and Justin would DM all of the technical stuff, the combats and the rules, interpretation and that kind of thing. Because if you haven't picked up by now, Rules and I are distant relations who really don't like each other. They get in the way of me telling a story and I get in the way of them making sense. Anyway, Braxland was born and we had lots of fun playing there. And what then happened was that, well, then I moved cities. So I moved from a coastal city, the biggest coastal city on this side of the South African continent, and I moved up into Johannesburg, the not capital of South Africa, capital. It's the biggest city that we have. And I make friends fairly easily, and went to the very first convention and found a new group of role players to join me. Now, of course, we carried on playing in Braxland, and for a while, the group was all foreigners. Johannesburg is a very cliquey place, I think most cities are, and it was only foreigners who were there. So I had an American, I had someone from the West Coast, I had someone from the East Coast, a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in years was also up here. So we had this foreign legion, and that's what we called ourselves whenever we went to conventions and that kind of thing. And the Foreign Legion played and fleshed out a lot of Braxland as they moved about it. And that particular campaign grew to such a point that eventually they were traveling between planes and they were assassinating gods. Now, one of the things that I do in my campaigns is that if you pray to a god and you've been worshipping the god for an extended period of time and have made a concerted effort to appease the god and follow the god's rituals, if you pray to the god, you roll a D100, and if you roll 1%, the god manifests. Now, if you are asking for something that is within the god's power and follows the god's tenets, the god might grant it. If you are asking for something selfish that has nothing to do with the god, unless of course it's the god of selfishness, the god will strike you dead. These particular players, through hook and crook and manipulation and a year's worth of campaigning, playing every single week for several hours a week, eventually got to the point where the gods had hired them to assassinate other gods. And the campaign took an interesting twist when the god of joy and colour was assassinated and the world went to black and white. Now, what made this also very interesting was I was running two groups at the time. My job at the time was fairly easy on time. There's lots of time in that sentence. But I was running 2 groups, and the 2 groups were in the same world, but on different quests and different settings. And when the one group sat down at the table, I said, "Oh, by the way, the world's gone into black and white. There's no colour. And there are no children laughing, and no one is smiling, and there's no such thing as jokes anymore. It's all been erased from the collective because the god of joy and colour has died. They've been assassinated." Now, eventually, one of the characters managed to lure, defeat, trick, connive, and basically combine with various other gods to become the one true god of Braxland. And what an evil and twisted bastard he was. But that was the way that Braxland worked. Then, of course, very finally, we got to where we are today, when I decided to run a game online, on YouTube specifically, just to help raise the level of gaming somewhere in some small space. I needed Braxland to change. I needed the map to be my own unique map that I have created and controlled. But because for almost 12 years, Braxland had been growing and developing these amazing little facets that make it feel like a real world, I simply transposed all of the history and all of the information to Braxland, or Braxia, as it is known today. And we now play in that space. And it has been such an interesting learning curve when you are playing for a public, how different things are and how critical one becomes of oneself. And how when you think it's a good idea, in reflection you look at it and you go, what were you thinking? So, Seth, I hope this has given you a whirlwind tour of my exploits. I haven't gone into great detail on each of those campaigns because, well, either you had to be there or it's just me telling stories of when I was young. If it is something that interests you, let me know. I'm always eager to share whatever experiences I can and try and work in some kind of learning or take home from it that might be useful to someone. This video is the last video that we are creating, hold it, don't panic, whilst we are not part of Patreon. So as of next week, we will officially be on Patreon, and although we would encourage everybody on planet Earth to come and join us on Patreon, because of course then I can go full time, the point of the entire exercise is simply so that we can continue improving the channel as we have been very slowly over the last year. And I want to thank all of you who have been with us so far on this journey, and to welcome those of you who are new, and to say that regardless of what happens on Patreon, these videos are going to continue being made. But the Marketing Goblin insists that I mention it so that you know that it is there. And if you want to have an influence in the topics and the way that this channel evolves, join us on Patreon. The links are all below. Now, to publicize the fact, we are also doing what is called a Thunderclap, and that's got, from time of this video, I think it's got 2 days left where we need to raise 100 supporters on the Thunderclap process. There's a video on what you need to do. It's very, very simple. And we are on 97 subscribers to the Thunderclap, which is a once-off advertisement of us going on to Patreon. So do join us if you want to see us reach that 100 mark. There are 3 spots left, and of course I think it rolls above 100 once you get there. So let's see if we can. I hope this has been helpful in some very small way, and perhaps insightful or encouraging or inspiring, or perhaps it's just been maybe 18 minutes of drivel. I hope not. Anyway, until next time, reflect back on your games. Remarkable, is it not, that we have these worlds that we've created in with memories that are as vivid as if we had lived them ourselves. I still think back on Bellenrand slogging through those dank sewers, smelling the scent of kobold dung and human waste, and finding that little room that he could eventually call his own all these years later. So we have a truly remarkable experience that we are creating. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave your comments. As always, I do reply to, as humanly possible, as many as we can. Some of them do slip through the cracks, but it is what it is. So, until next time, happy gaming.